Okay, hi everybody. This is officially the Talking Data Equity for January 16th, 2026, our first 2026 version. And I am so happy to see so many familiar names and faces. Welcome. It is great to see you again. And we also have some new names and faces, and I am very, very excited. I always love it when it's your first time here. So let me give you just a very short overview of what to expect. Talking Data Equity is a informal drop-in event that We All Count hosts most Fridays at noon Toronto time. And the Zoom link always stays the same. So now that you have found us once, you will be able to find us again. And if you ever want to know who is coming to Talking Data Equity, you can go to the Talking Data Equity main page, which is located right here. And that's where you can see what's coming up. And we do record these events. And so if you want to see a past event, you can use the link here to see all of the past events. And that's also where you can get access to the resources. So we will be recording today's Talking Data Equity, just like we do most Fridays. And we're going to put links to all the different resources that we talk about in that data equity forum. So you don't have to try and capture every single resource that's shared today. You can sit back, relax, and go over to that page for the resources when it's convenient for you. My name, which I should have said right from the jump, is Heather Kraus. I'm a mathematical statistician, and I'm the founder of the organization that brings you Talking Data Equity. We All Count. I mostly spend my time running public and private trainings about data equity tools. And we talk about those sometimes in this, but really, I love to hear about the projects that you all are working on. And that is what we're going to do today. We're going to hear about a really, really cool project that our special guest, Mickey, is working on. So I'm going to introduce Mickey now. And before I do, let me just ask, since there's a lot of us here, that while Mickey's sharing his stories and his slides, you keep your microphone turned off. Feel free to ask questions, share reflections, chat away in the Zoom chat. And then if we have time at the end, we'll do an open mic Q&A. Okay. But for now, let's just use the chat. So thank you so much for making time to join us is Mickey McGlasson. Mickey is the community data scientist at the Create Lab and an adjunct professor at Carnegie Mellon University. He and his colleagues at Create Lab work in partnership with community-based organizations to use technology for societal benefits across a variety of domains, including housing, the natural environment, and education. Before Create, Mickey worked as a regional planner and then as a regional economic development consultant. And with us today in this talk, he's going to share some lessons that he's learned on his own journey working professionally with data. And for those of us just joining us, yes, this is being recorded, so you can share it with your friends, and we will also link to all of the recordings. So, Mickey, thank you so much in this very, very turbulent time and for making time to join us. I'm really, really happy to see you in person.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Turbulent indeed. Thanks for the nice introduction, and thanks for making this whole series possible. We appreciate you. As Heather said, I am a community data scientist. I'll explain what that means here in a little bit. I'm going to talk less about a specific project that I'm working on and more about the sort of work that my lab, the Create Lab, does in general. And I'll sample a few different projects. If people have questions about any particular project, when I'm done, I'm happy to follow up with you separately. We're eager to share the work that we do. I'm not going to go super deep on any one topic. And I'm also going to talk just a little bit about like the journey that I took to get here and how that informs the work that I do. And I'm going to use a specific point of inspiration for that. So when I first conceived of this talk, I was training to run a marathon, which has absolutely nothing to do with the talk, but led me to listen to a lot of audiobooks because that's what you do when you're running for hours at a time. And one of the books that I listened to very fittingly was a book called What I Talk About When I Talk About Running by Haruki Murakami, which I'm guessing at least some of you, I know Heather, you, and I'm guessing some of the rest of you are familiar with. It's an excellent book. It's a memoir kind of a writer who talks about his own experience as a runner, but also just kind of like his experiences that led him to be the writer that he is today. And while I have no doubt that I will fail to live up to this particular font of inspiration, what I'm going to use is this book as kind of a just kind of a model for the way that I'm going to talk about my journey in data visualization. And I call what I'm about to talk about what I talk about when I talk about data. So my apologies to Haruki Murakami, and thank you for the inspiration. My journey in data visualization begins where everybody else's begins, in childhood. Where else to start? Thank you. That's me in the bathtub, drawing what I think is a fairly elaborate, like a house on fire, fire truck kind of scene. Photo credit to my mother for this lovely image. When I was a kid, I was pretty interested in a lot of different stuff. I liked expressing my creativity in a lot of different ways. I think that's probably not a particularly original thing to say. I think that's true of most kids. As a father myself now, I see it in my own kid. But when I got a little older, I faced this dilemma where when I was in high school, I was entering that stage in life where we force teenagers to decide what they want to be for the next 50 years. I faced this issue where like some of me wanted to do the things that were labeled kind of creativity, and some part of me wanted to do the things that were sort of labeled engineering, math, these sorts of things. And I struggled to navigate between these two fields. You might think that the immediate secret door number 3 was data science, which of course is a lot of what a lot of us do on this call. But I had never heard that expression at this time. I didn't know what data science was. It was not on my list of things that I could plausibly do as a profession. But I had one particularly good teacher in high school. He was an art teacher, but he made me aware of this idea of a potential third path, which was architecture. The first thing he exposed me to was a magazine article about the Bilbao Museum by Frank Gehry, the Canadian-American architect who recently passed away, sadly. But anyway, Mr. Cox, shout out to Mr. Cox, was my art teacher in high school, and he said, you know what, you might consider there's this whole like world of design that also includes engineering and math and these other things that you seem to be interested in, and it seemed like I'd cracked it, like secret door number 3 was architecture. And I could do it all. And I didn't understand why everybody didn't want to do this. It seemed like the perfect career. This is the building where I studied architecture at Ball State University when I was an undergraduate student. That little brick box in the sky is where they house the first and second year studios. You'll note the absolute absence of anything resembling natural light or windows. I'm not sure why they do that. I think it's some sort of hazing ritual. Above the door is written the phrase, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here," which is a nod to Dante's Inferno. If you didn't believe that it was a hazing ritual, perhaps that will convince you. But for all the sort of hardship that was imposed on me as a young studio architecture student, I actually really enjoyed it. And I think I probably managed to learn at least a few things along the way. Some of those lessons continue to inform my work today as a data scientist. The first thing that one does when one is a studio architecture student, and the first thing that one does when one is a professional architect in the context of a new project, a new design project, is to start with a sketch. In fact, often mini sketches. That remains true even at the highest levels of architecture, but that's really ingrained in you when you're a young architecture student. When you talk to a professor about an idea, you do it with pen and paper. That sketch that we were just looking at, of course, is Frank Gehry's sketch of the very same Bilbao Museum that we were just looking at. And I continued to, this is the first lesson I'll leave you with about data visualization. Start with the sketch. I continue to find great value in the idea that by putting your thoughts on paper graphically, you can challenge assumptions about what you expect from a particular data visualization or analysis project. And to this day, when I take on like a new task that's going to end in a data graphic or visual, I start with the two most important pieces of technology in my arsenal, a pen and a piece of paper. And I draw what I expect it to look like. And I have found that that is a very powerful way to challenge my own assumptions as they arise during the process of doing analysis and visualization. The challenge, of course, is that much like with architecture and with data science and everything else, there's a difference between art for art's sake and design for purpose. In that same building where I went to architecture school, there was a professor who hung a quote on the door outside, on the wall outside their door to their office, that I will remember for the rest of my life. I find this quote to be so compelling, and it continues to inform how I think about design work writ large. It's by a famous American architect in the mid-20th century named Louis Kahn, who is famous for sort of his original approach to a lot of very well-received building designs. And he says, I'll just read it off because I'm not going to do better than the words themselves. A painter can paint square wheels on a cannon, and a sculptor can sculpt the same square wheels, but an architect must use round wheels and still express the futility of war. And I'm not going to ruin the quote by trying to explain it, but I claim that the same message about the necessity of function applies very similarly to the act of data visualization, because what we're designing is not art, it's functional art. It's something that must work in order to have impact. So my second lesson is don't forget the wheels. As I got closer to like what would have been a professional career in architecture, however, I started to have a harder and harder time seeing myself working as a professional architect, and that's why I'm talking to you today as a data scientist and not a professional architect. As I was approaching like this period of life where I had to, get a job or do something after I graduated from school, I had a hard time. I saw friends getting jobs at architecture firms, and I had a hard time seeing myself doing what they were doing. There were two big issues that I came across in what I was seeing from my friends and peers who were navigating this professional landscape. One was on the bottom right, who they were working for. I didn't see a lot of people designing big museums for public purpose. I saw a lot of people designing 4,000 square foot mansions for families of four who could afford it. And that did not speak to me. I also saw the type of work they were doing. I saw that young architects or graduate architects in training were forced to do a lot of detail work. And the theoretical message of that was, if you spend a lot of time drawing section details, you'll learn how buildings work in a way that you just can't if you don't get into the weeds of the thing. And I buy that to some extent, but there was a certain lack of appreciation for the wider context of the work that I saw go lacking in the type of work that a lot of my peers were doing. And I took this lesson away from that chapter of my life. It matters who you serve with your work. And I mean this in two ways. One, it matters in the kind of obvious way who the work serves in that, like, if you're building mansions for the wealthy elite, then that's who you're serving. But I also mean when you're mired in the details of your work, it's hard to back out sometimes and see who your work is serving. And I find in data science that that's a particular challenge. And it's one that I continue to face because as data scientists, we often love to dive into the details of a thing. And it's important periodically to back out and take stock of who the work is serving and how it fits into the wider context of the world you're living in. So what did I do? I did not become an architect. I took a break. I joined an AmeriCorps program called NCCC. If there are any AmeriCorps alums in the crowd, I don't know. Throw me some emojis. I joined an AmeriCorps program called NCCC. NTRIP is sort of the modern incarnation of the CCC under Roosevelt, where you live and work with small groups, small teams of young people. This was my AmeriCorps team. And I spent a year of my life doing stuff like trail clearing and light construction and all sorts of like deeply rewarding tasks that in any direct way taught me nothing about data per se, but were to this day the most important thing I did in my career. I took a break, I took stock, and I spent some time thinking about what I wanted to do with my life. Then I decided to take a job as a regional planner. It seemed like an excellent fit, and it really was. It was architecture adjacent. I could use some of the things that I learned in my undergraduate program, but in some ways it was everything that architecture wasn't. Instead of designing for the few, I was designing for the many. Instead of futzing over the details, I was designing wholesale neighborhoods and laying out trail systems like you see on this slide. These are two examples of actual work that I did at the Planning Commission where I worked. And it was great fun. But I kept running into this pestiferous issue. Consultants, no offense to I'm going to guess like 30% of this call that are consultants. We'll get to the part in my career where I become one, spoiler alert, but so I promise no shade intended. But I kept running into this problem where we as a public institution would bring in consultants because they had access to this like magical stuff called data that we did not have access to. I mean, we theoretically might have, but at the time it felt like this mysterious substance that only the qualified could handle. And not that all consultants are bad. I very much do not mean that, but all of us, I'm confident, have experienced what it means to work with a bad consultant from time to time. And once you have, you never quite lose that taste in your mouth of somebody who got hired to do a thing because they have access to proprietary information, because they have a credential on paper that allows them to like provide a stamp of authority to a project in a way that doesn't really add value, in a way that adds noise. And it gave me this allergy that I'll try to frame as a lesson that I intend to never lose, which is an allergy to expertise or to the concept of expertise. So my next lesson is don't be an expert. It's an overrated credential. I don't mean to suggest that knowledge is bad. I think very much the opposite. But expertise in itself speaks to a type of knowledge that doesn't seek to learn. And expertise, in my mind, and maybe I'm putting a little too much on the word here, I admit, is the enemy of creativity and imagination. So I hope never to be an expert, and I try not to work with experts. I do try to learn from other people as much as I can, and I hope to continue doing that for the rest of my life. What I did take from this little chapter of life was the realization that if I wanted to solve my expert problem, I wasn't going to get around it by making fun of them. I needed to gain some skills myself. And this was still pretty early in my path on like data science as a career. And so I started to learn some things outside of the context of like formal educational environment. I learned some programming skills. I got pretty good at GIS. I took one course in statistics, and I started to find myself on this path towards a skill set that enabled me to do the same things that these consultants that I was so uninterested in working with seemed to make their living doing. I'll walk through one particular example where I started to kind of deploy these skills for the first time. That'll lead me to my next lesson. We were working in, this is the town where I work. This is Bennington, Vermont. My office is in the middle of the downtown at this time in my life. And as a planner, some of the stuff that I'm charged with is like the planning for parking infrastructure and other land use regulations in the downtown. I know that sounds a little boring, but this was my life at the time. I was totally into it. And some people were of the opinion that we didn't have enough parking to spur new development in the downtown, and that new buildings needed to come with more parking. I didn't think this was true, and I was pretty confident I was right because I walked to work every day through a bunch of empty parking lots. I had a colleague, another young person, kind of at a similar stage in his career, who was along with me, kind of just starting to get a taste for this data stuff, and he, as it happened, biked to work from the other direction, and he and I set out to disprove what we took to be a pretty false narrative around the level of parking use and requirement in the downtown. And we decided we were going to do it with this all-powerful data. So we started by mapping the downtown. We categorized land use in the downtown according to, fairly basic typology of ground cover. We quantified that. We made the case that, plainly put, we have a lot of parking. It is the thing we use. It is the biggest land use in the downtown. That's the yellow part. We did this little diagram where we reorganized the downtown so that people could kind of imagine what it would look like if you put all the parking lots together. And it's pretty big. I would say unnecessary, just in an obvious way here, but that wasn't quite enough to make our case. So we went a step further and we conducted a survey. For a couple of months, we went out periodically, different days. We would take pictures of parking lots. We tallied how many cars could fit total in each parking lot. And then we would count by parking lot how many cars were in each picture. And we would say what percentage of the parking lot was used. And we averaged those results over a period of a couple of months. And what we found was that the majority of those parking lots, on average, during business hours, were unoccupied, making the biggest user of land in our downtown empty parking. Suffice it to say, we were convincing in our argument. But the lesson we learned was one that I think will not be unfamiliar to any of you, but it's worth remembering when you are in the thick of it, how powerful data is when you don't have access to it. And when you first, I think probably many of us have had that like moment of realization the first time we used data to make a case for a thing and found it to be successful. Mine was parking in Bennington, but I'm sure each of you have some version of that. There is enormous power in this thing that we do. It's worth remembering. As our sort of analytical capacity increased at the Planning Commission where I worked, we took on more and more projects that required us to do analysis. It was a lot of joy to work on. The culmination of this was a big energy plan that the state contracted us and a couple of other planning commissions to lead without the support of consultants. We were going to do our own analytical work on this project. And we did, and we wrote what you could still find on as the 2016 Bennington Regional Energy Plan, along with other regional energy plans throughout the state of Vermont, that took a region by region approach to identifying a pathway towards achieving the state's then stated but not particularly well planned goal of reaching 90% renewable energy generation by 2050. Part of that plan was involved the sort of mapping work that you see on the left side, where we were looking at like solar energy potential in a place that's not particularly well known for being sunny. And what we found was that, sure enough, if you add up all the land that is actually very well suited to solar based on sun availability and slope and so forth, land use, there's more than enough land to develop the sort of renewable infrastructure that would be required to reach the goals of the region. And since the adoption of this plan, we've seen a lot, like that region has seen a lot of activity in both solar and wind development. So I'll just reiterate the message that data is power, sometimes kind of literally. But upon realizing the enormous power that data presented in my life, I decided I wanted a little more of it. I wanted something more formal in terms of the education that was required to do these things professionally. And that brought me to grad school, which is there, which is also there. That's Heinz College at Carnegie Mellon. You'll note, unlike my undergraduate program, the building is covered in windows. I was a big fan of the natural light at this point in my life. And if you're wondering, yes, this is what Pittsburgh looks like pretty much year round. It's a beautiful city. You should come visit. At Heinz College, I studied public policy, but it was with a heavy focus on analytics. That's kind of what Heinz is known for. I don't know if there are any other Heinz grads in this crowd. I hope there are. And I studied statistics, econometrics, machine learning, the sort of formal tools of the trade in this profession. And I got, the credentials that I wasn't going to get probably in an independent environment like I had been working. And in that process, I took one particular class that spoke just exactly to the type of work that I wanted to do. It's called Urban and Regional Economic Development. It was taught by Jerry Paytas, and I loved it. It felt familiar in good ways, but very analytically focused. And I was hooked on this as a career path. Jerry encouraged me to do an internship with him after graduation, and that turned into an actual job. The only catch was that Jerry's job was consulting. And so I became a consultant, but like the good kind, So see, I told you, no shade to consultants. I worked at a firm called Fourth Economy, and it felt very different in a lot of ways than the consultants that I had interacted with previously. The firm was focused on inclusive economic development, emphasis on inclusive economic development. And it gave me a chance to be a better version of the thing that I took such umbrage with before. It was a very people-oriented environment. We spent a lot of time getting to know the communities where we worked. A lot of that work was local to where we lived. Some of it was farther afield, but in those cases, we spent a lot of time getting familiar with the places where we were working. And a lot of the work was kind of in-your-face, equity-focused. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do work that mattered to the world and made it a better place. This particular example captures some analysis that we were doing around segregation. And in Pittsburgh, we're looking at I'm not going to walk through all the graphics, but we're looking at neighborhood segregation by income, and trying to quantify how segregated Pittsburgh's wealth is and how that bears pretty significant correspondence to wage disparity in Pittsburgh's labor market. We also did work that was, frankly, just fun. This is an example of an economic impact analysis that we conducted for the Gap Trail. If people are familiar with the Great Allegheny Passage, it's a wonderful multi-use trail system that runs from Pittsburgh to Cumberland, Maryland, 150 miles. And we did a year-long economic impact study where we interviewed businesses throughout the trail and tried to quantify the impact that the trail had on their business and the towns that surrounded those businesses. And in the process, I got to like ride my bike for work and stuff, and it was just fun. And we worked with great people and had a great time. And all the while, we were using the tools of a profession that are often used to justify public expenditure for private good under the auspices of ostensible job creation for something that was really like a genuinely free public resource that brought a lot of good to a lot of communities. And this work was deeply enjoyable. But I had a hard time, as I'm sure nearly all of us did in our own ways, in transitioning to the remote culture that came with COVID. And in the process, I very much learned the lesson that a lot of the magic that is required to do this work well and enjoy it happens in person. And I don't say that as I don't say that to imply like remote work bad. I don't say it to imply hybrid work bad. As the parent of a toddler, trust me, like I greatly value remote flexibility in work. But there's a necessary component to effective collaboration that only really sparks, for me at least, in the room. And that matters more the less well you know the place that you're working. And as the firm that I was working at started to work in more distant surrounds in a more remote environment, it became harder and harder for me to do good work. So when a colleague of mine informed me of an opportunity in what were very familiar surrounds, I couldn't pass it up. Yes, you've seen this picture before. Yes, that's where I went to grad school, but that's not why I'm showing you the same picture. That's because this is where I work right now at the Great Lab in the next building. If you're thinking I've spent too much of my life on one city block, that's fair. Touche. But let me tell you a little bit with the remaining time that I have about what we do at the Create Lab. The truth is there's not a particularly short answer to the question, what is the Create Lab? The lab was established over 25 years ago, and it's taken on all sorts of different projects in that time. It's morphed a lot in terms of the focus that it has on the type of work that it does. But the consistent thread through all of that work has been that the Great Lab works in partnership with community organizations to do technology-enabled work on social issues. And sometimes that means digital technology, sometimes it means physical technology, robotics, but all of it is done in partnership with community groups, and that's what I claim sets us apart from a lot of the activity that takes place at large research universities. We maintain robust collaborations over many years with a variety of different partners. When I first got into the working at the Great Lab, I was struck by the vast kind of portfolio of projects that the lab had done over the years, which seemed to be just like all over the map. In the past, work at the lab had included a project called Charge Car, which sought to develop a retrofit kit for electric vehicles to make for like traditional gas-powered vehicles to become electric vehicles, which sought to make EVs more affordable and accessible to people. It included a project called Hear Me, where young people, children, were recorded telling their own stories in response to questions, and then those stories were made publicly accessible in these cool little kiosks that you see in that center image there on the slide, where people could listen to the stories that young people told in a library, kind of like an oral history project, but celebrating contemporary young people's stories. Then like we did all this other stuff. So my colleague Ann Wright maintains a script that scrapes municipal court records for eviction filings that she makes available to now the eviction lab, which many of you are probably aware of, like Matt Desmond's project, but also the local anti-eviction group that provides free legal resources to people facing eviction, so that they can, get ahead of the eviction filings when they're issued. And it was so cool to be in an environment where there were all these different people with all these different skills, all of them technical, but different forms of technical skills, different backgrounds, doing all this work that was so interesting. Another project that the Great Lab started a while ago that made a lot of news was the GigaPan project. So GigaPan is a robotic camera system, a camera mount system, where a digital camera is trained by a robot to take a lot of different pictures of a scene and create a very, very rich pixel dense panorama that is enormously zoomable and fixed on a particular scene, so it can be animated over time. And we've done a lot of interesting storytelling work and a lot of interesting exploration work with young people in classroom environments with GigaPans. This particular image is the thing that went most viral among our past GigaPans. This is of Obama's first inauguration. I think when this image was released, we crashed this is just before I worked in the lab, but we crashed the CMU servers because so many people wanted to view this image at once because it was so powerful. But in this image, you can, I can't demonstrate on the slide, but if you go to GigaPan, the website, you can zoom in at such a detail that you can see individual faces all throughout the crowd. And we've done work in classrooms where you ask people to zoom in on a face and try to understand who they are, what they're thinking, so forth, under the premise that all of this is a form of very rich data. And that takes us to a lesson that we continue to learn on repeat in the lab, which is data is everywhere. Data are everywhere if you're, a Latin snob. Another project that we've had a lot of success with, some of you might have experienced, is a data visualization platform called EarthTime. EarthTime was originally built in the lab to look at climate impacts over time. It informs the work that later became like Google Maps background to the Google Maps satellite images that you see in the background of Google Maps. But what we do in EarthTime data visualizations is make very rich data available at a global scale and animate it across time. I'm going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat if anybody wants to look at this on EarthTime, because what you're looking at here is just a still image of what on EarthTime is an animated layer. But what we're dealing with here is a source of data that a lot of you are very familiar with, and that feels very much like, traditional data. It's decennial data from the decennial census. It captures race and ethnicity from, in this case, the 2020 census in Pittsburgh. But what we do in the way that we visualize it in EarthTime is not show it as a choropleth and not show it static for a single year. We animate it over time, and we visualize individual dots for individual people with census blocks as a sort of randomized unit of geography for creating dots. And we do this for the entire United States. So if you go to that link, can I speak to efforts to ensure privacy? I'm just going to answer that real quick. So they're anonymized geographically, like the dot is accurate down to the census block, but it doesn't go to a specific household. But it allows you to see a map as people in a way that I swear to God, a choropleth will never like conjure in your mind. And we've had a lot of success with this kind of mechanism for visualization and some of the other things that the other sort of what we call visual tropes that we've designed in Earth time to capture different types of data on maps and animate them over time. The lesson I take from this is that sometimes you got to bake from scratch. The default, it's more work, no doubt about it. But when you invent a mechanism for visualizing a thing that you're not borrowing from a software default, you sometimes force yourself to explore a new and ultimately sometimes better way to do it. Not always the case, but and to be fair, if anyone has tried to bake as I have, sometimes it doesn't come out well, but sometimes you got to try to bake from scratch. That said, not everything that we do in the lab looks entirely unfamiliar as data visualization. Sometimes we try to tell the same story in very simple data graphics. This captures a very similar story to the one we were just telling with the decennial data in the exact same geographies, where we're looking at the Black population in Pittsburgh being forced out of the city over a period of decades, and presumably being forced into the outlying communities in the county where housing tends to be more affordable. And we see this as gentrification. But the real message here isn't that it's always clarity over complexity, because in our work we use both. There are times in which we value simple messaging, and there are times in which we value more complex messaging. And in my experience, your toolkit has to include both of those. Both extremes on that spectrum if you're going to be effective in data analysis. The same software that we use to visualize local patterns of segregation and gentrification, we're using on a global scale. This is a photo of me and my colleague Harry standing next to me, along with the president of our university and his wife. And then to my right is Joyita Gupta, who's the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize winner, one of the winners of the 2007 prize for her climate work. We worked with Joyita in Davos last year to do a presentation where we did the data graphics for her, talking about water scarcity at a global scale, and we used Earth time to present those data graphics. The same software that we're using right here locally with like community groups, we're using in what might be the most like elite kind of environment I've ever been in at Davos. I have a shirt from a brewery that I used to like that says, think globally, drink locally. I'm not opposed to that message, especially these days, but when it comes to data science, I'm a fan of the somewhat less catchy, you do both, think globally and think locally. It's valuable to your work to live at both extremes and to have fluency in issues at both a global and local scale. I'm deeply grateful that I work in an organization where I get to do that. There's no example of our work that better illustrates that than our work on environmental issues. This is a screenshot of an app called Smell PGH. I'm going to throw that in the chat too. It sounds kind of goofy. This is an app where people crowdsource report smells and what we call smell events. And what we're trying to do with this app is identify signatures of pollution events based on crowd-reported smells. We couple this with, sorry about that. Let's see. we couple this um, a, with weather modeling software that we use to show how pollution moves from different known sources of industrial pollution on a platform that we call Plume PGH. So you see the little dots flowing away from 3 points. Those are the 3 large industrial steel facilities in the Mon Valley outside of Pittsburgh. And I'll just play that animation one more time. This is an example of a day where the smell reports that came through Smell PGH, which show up as triangles, strongly correspond to the wind pattern that we see moving pollution from the known large emitters that are the large steel facilities. Using the same kind of modeling, we can aggregate over time. Yes, I know it's, thanks, Mauro. It's kind of therapeutic in a bleak sort of way. Yeah. Using the same software for weather modeling, we can aggregate over time how pollution accrues to different areas from known sources. And so for the same facilities, we can aggregate what we call a primary pollution zone, where we know a particular level of particulate matter is accruing over time from these sources based on weather patterns. We can talk about how that zone is connected economically to the facilities that pollute it. And when we do an analysis of jobs in that region, we find that the trade-off is really stark for the communities that are closest to the mills. They get very few of the jobs that exist at these facilities in modern times. Historically, of course, mill communities were much more connected to the mills, but today they are not. And they receive the vast majority of the pollution from these facilities. But it's inescapable context to the work that we do that these exact facilities that we're looking at on the map were formerly owned by the exact same Carnegie that appears in the first name on our university's sign, because U.S. Steel is the modern incarnation of what was formerly Carnegie Steel. Carnegie's very first steel plant was Edgar Thomson, that's still open today, 150 years later, still polluting the community of Braddock and North Braddock and nearby communities in the Mon Valley. And we are, in some sense, the legacy of Carnegie. The institution that he made possible is the one in which our lab exists. And it's a difficult kind of context for us to navigate. It means we have to do a lot more work building trust with partners to be like a reparative force in that legacy. But it means we care a lot about rewriting the legacy that we kind of inherit while being at this institution. And that is probably the last lesson I'll leave you with today. But I'll just highlight one more quick example of our work. So the work that we've done around pollution tracking and so forth that you just saw on those on the Plume PGH animation has caught the eye of other people outside of this call as well, one of whom was none other than Al Gore and the organization that he is now kind of the champion of, called Climate Trace. And I'll throw that link in the chat too. And we've worked for the last couple of years with Climate Trace as part of a coalition of other researchers at other universities and institutions to do pollution monitoring, not just here for a few facilities, but globally for a vast inventory of facilities, and tracking both pollution and carbon emissions from large industrial sources around the world, thousands and thousands of large industrial sources around the world. And if you look on the Climate Trace website, you'll see the same, a slightly swankier version of the same Plume graphics that have existed on Plume PGH for years now. for every major polluter in the world, for an exhaustive inventory of major industrial polluters around the world. I'm going to stop talking just in case people have a few questions before we sign off here, but I'll just leave you with this thought. I know I spent the whole time talking about myself, and I'm sorry about that. I don't actually intend this to be like a how-to talk. I don't intend you to take away from it that you should do the things that I do or listen to the lessons that I just offered you. If they were valuable to you, great. But if they aren't, really, no offense taken. What I will encourage you to do as I leave you here is to take stock of your own story and think about like how the lessons that you've learned along the way that maybe you don't think about in those exact terms and how they inform your work. Because I found this exercise preparing for this talk really useful in thinking about how I work today and how like the story of how I got here informs how I do my work today. So I encourage you to do the same. And with that, thanks for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Mickey. This was a gorgeous presentation for starters, and I hope you can see on the screen all the applause and all the hearts
Thanks.
and
Thanks very much.
a lot of appreciation. It was a really wonderful way to kind of learn about your journey at the same time as learning about a lot of the very cool projects that you've been involved in. It absolutely, I met Mickey by finding out about the tools that they build that help citizens, or citizens is the wrong word right now, but like residents, people who live in a place, uh, fact check and crowdsource what's really going on in their neighborhood around smell, around sound, around light, around particulate pollution. And I really highly encourage you, if any of these little stories caught your eye, to dig down. There's a lot on the Create Lab website, and we'll make all of those resources available. We have a couple of outstanding questions in the chat and not very much time. So some of those questions I'm going to follow up with in the forum and make sure that we get answers to some of those questions. But I want to give an opportunity to anybody who's in the room that wants to turn their microphone on and share a response with Mickey or ask a question to go ahead and do that. Hey, Asher, great to see you.
Hello. Thank you for this talk, and just always thank you, Heather, for holding this space. It's my weekly highlight. And I'm interested, Mickey, in your understanding of expertise, because I share some of that skepticism. But I also think that that skepticism is based on a really particular definition of what an expert is, right? Like like I have my PhD in English literature, right? Like I have that traditional expertise that is based in an exclusionary white supremacist culture. So I was wondering if all of this incredible work that you're doing with the Create Lab in particular, has that pushed on your definition of expertise at all? Is that something yeah. So I was curious a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, and I probably am too allergic to the particular word. Like a younger version of me decided that expertise was a thing that meant I know the answer and you don't. And while that is a totally unfair definition to a lot of people's version of expertise, that's the one that I'm talking about. Like it's that knowledge is a thing that I possess and it is finite kind of idea of the world. This is how we do it. Therefore, we will do it this way. Like it's easy to get, when you're really good at a thing, it's easy to get into the pattern of doing it a particular way. And I think you always got to check yourself on that front. But it's that like, I know the answer expertise that I am particularly allergic to. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for vocalizing that question, Asher. I really appreciate it because there's a lot going on in the chat about expertise. So that was a theme I wasn't expecting to come out of today, but now that when Mickey, you mentioned it and other people responded, I realized what a deep part of We All Count in the work that we do that is as well, is like sometimes people are telling you to do something because it's needed for scientific rigor. And sometimes people are telling you to do something because it's their habit and they have the authority to make you do it. And they're pretending it's about scientific rigor. That really is one of the core elements of We All Count. So I really appreciate that conversation. We are going to have to leave it here. I know that we haven't gotten to everybody's questions, and I highly encourage you to hop over to the forum. I'll put the forum link in the chat one more time. And we'll put the recording and the resources up once they're processed. And thank you for coming. The Talk Data Equity would be nothing without fantastic speakers doing great work, and all of you as well. And kind of actually, now that I think about it, this wasn't planned, but on the topic of like experts and people making you do things, that's exactly what we're talking about next week. Next Friday, we have, let me just make sure, because I'm a little disoriented still in January. I just want to make sure that it's next Friday. I think it's next Friday. Yep, it is next Friday. So next Friday, same time, same Zoom link, we have Dr. Camden Strunk coming to talk to us about kind of the difference between good methodology and a kind of a word called method idolatry, which is like, doing something out of sort of dogma or religious fervor rather than scientific rigor. So it's going to dogtail. Is that right? It's going to flow really well from this conversation into that one. So, Mickey, thanks a million for all the work that you do and for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to share with us. And all of you, thank you for coming. We know that 2026 feels like it's already been a year long. So come back next Friday and we'll all remember that we're still doing the work and we're not alone. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Heather.
Thanks, Mikey.